So, in this session, we will go through networking best practices and we will cover Wi Fi, Ethernet, VPN, as well as certificates and 802.1x. So, if you'd like, you're able to follow along in the admin console. You can use the username that has been provided to you at chromedeployment.com. And then the password should be the same for everyone. So it's password with a capital P underscore 2020. And I recommend that you then use an incognito window and use that to navigate to admin.google.com. So we're going to start off by covering the network settings, and uh, the settings include configuration options, for example, Wi-Fi, Ethernet, VPN, and certificates. Also, I just want to mention that a lot of the UI that we're going to visit and during these configurations do make references to um, different type of devices. So, for example, Meet devices or Android or iOS. But the policies that we're going to configure is going to be specifically targeted to Chrome OS. So let's look at configuring Wi-Fi networks. So if you start from the network settings and then press create Wi-Fi network, you will be presented with the following UI. And the first thing that you want to do is to decide which platform that you want this network to be accessible for. And as you see, we have a few options, and there's two of them for Chromebooks. So it's either Chromebooks by user or Chromebooks by device. And that is due to the nature of how networking works with Chrome OS Enterprise. So you can have two different types of networks. So either a user level network or a device level network. And the reason for this is that you always want to have the device connected to a network at all times. So for that reason, you could have one less secure guest network, for example, which the device would always be connected to, and then depending on the user, you could get that user access to more secure and restricted network once they've actually authenticated and logged into the user session. So once you've decided that, we will set the network's name and SSID, so the friendly name for the network, and then the SSID for the Wi-Fi, and then also decide if the SSID should be broadcasted or not. So if the SSID would show up when a client is doing a network scan, and then if the devices should automatically connect to the network or not. Then we also get some security settings. So you can choose if you want the network to be protected by WEP, so insecure network, or with WPA or WPA2, if it should use 802.1x or possibly dynamic WEP. You also have the option of configuring a proxy. So you can choose between having a manual proxy configuration, automatic one, or if you want the network to use a web proxy out of discovery. And finally, you have the option of also setting any static DNS servers that you would like to use for this network. So the process of configuring a Ethernet network is similar to how you configure Wi-Fi networks. So from the networks page, if you click Create Ethernet Networks, then you're presented with the following UI. So the first thing that you want to do is decide which platform you want the network to be accessible for. So again, you can choose between Chromebooks by user or by device. And then following that, you set the name for the network and choose if you want to use 802.1x authentication or not. And we will cover more on how you configure that a bit further ahead. And then if you want to use a proxy, you can configure that from here as well. And then finally, you can set any static DNS servers that you want to set for this network. So let's have a look at how you can configure a VPN through the Google Admin Console. And I also want to mention that this is how you configure the internal VPN client on Chrome OS, but you also have the option of enabling VPN on the end clients by using, for example, an Android app or a Chrome extension as well. But again, this is how you configure the internal client. So you start off by clicking Create VPN Network from the networks page, and then you decide the device type that the network should apply to. And with VPNs, there's only one option available, so that would be Chromebooks by user. You then enter a name for the VPN connection as well as the public IP of the VPN remote host. Then you can choose between L2TP and OpenVPN, and then enter the connection details. And if you're using a proxy in conjunction with the VPN, you now can configure it. So you'll have the same options as with the previous network configuration. So either a manual, automatic, or a web proxy auto discovery proxy setting. And finally, you're able to set a static DNS server if you so wish. So on pushing server certificates, if you want to do that, then you click on Create Certificate from the networks page. And server certificates can be used for a number of things. So it could be to authenticate VPN endpoints, clients on your LAN, HTTPS resources, as well as root certificates that can be used to generate client certificates. So you start by giving the certificate a friendly name, and then you press upload. And from there, you can upload a certificate that corresponds to the certificate you want to upload. And the certificate needs to be formatted as X509 PEM, but the actual extension can be either PEM or CRT or a CRR file. Then you select if you want the certificate to be a certificate authority, and that is not necessary for all certificates or all use cases. But if you want, for example, to enable SSL inspection, then that is something that you will have to select. And also note that if you do use SSL inspecting certs, then multiple sign-ins will be disabled for those users where the certificates are in effect. So on to managing client certs. So while server certs are for authenticating servers to users and to clients, then the client certs are used by the network and by web resources such as VPN servers or radius servers sitting behind your Wi-Fi and to identify and authenticate users. And the steps to putting a client cert on a device includes generating a key pair securely on the device, and then sending the public key as well as bundling up other identifying authenticating information into a certificate request and send it to the certificate authority or the CA to obtain the certificate. And then once that is proved, the last step is to import the certificate to the device. And thankfully, we have the Chrome Enterprise Platform Keys API, and that allows third parties to easily develop Chrome extensions that are able to provision client certificates for Chrome OS. And a benefit of using this approach is that it ensures that you're using strong hardware-backed keys. So the API makes use of the Titan C chip, which sits on every Chrome OS device. And by leveraging this hardware back key, then you can make sure or you can prevent that private keys can't be stolen or shared or exported from the device. And we are seeing that a lot of customers are using Windows Active Directory certificate services, and therefore we've made available a specific extension. So the certificate enrollment for Chrome OS extension, and users or customers can then use that extension in order to request and install certificates on the devices. So on how to installing the certificate enrollment for Chrome OS extension, there's a few prerequisites for using the extension, and those are that you need to be running at least Microsoft Windows Server through 2008 or 2 or later, as well as Microsoft Internet Information Services IS 7.0 or later. Also, you need to have the Active Directory Services ADCS, including the Certificate Enrollment Service, the Certificate Enrollment Policy. You also need to have a valid certificate that's associated to the ADCS website in IIS, as well as a visible endpoint for CEP and CES. The certificate enrollment for Chrome OS extension, it should be force installed at the users sessions that are going to make use of the certificate enrollment extension. And you can do this through the same manner that you would force install any other application on a Chrome OS device. So through the apps and extensions page in the Google Admin Console, and then look it up in the Chrome Web Store, and then set to force install. And the extension also require a JSON config file in order to set the necessary parameters for the extension in order to be able to communicate with the servers that you are configuring with. And then also you can find some of the configuration options, and as well as a sample config file on the link on this page. So as I brought up earlier, and there's user networks and device networks, and in that same manner, we also have user certs and device-wide certs. And the certificate enrollment for Chrome OS extension can be used to enroll either of those types. And the difference between them is that the user certs are stored inside of the user's profile. So when a user logs off, those certs are encrypted and can't be used until the user logs back in. And the device level certs are stored outside of the user's profile. So they are available at the login screen and in kiosk mode, in managed guest sessions, and to any logged in user on the device. So the user certs can therefore only be used by networks that are applied by user, and device-wide certs can be used by networks that are applied by device. And you can select to enroll a device-wide certificate by ticking the box on the screenshot down below. So now that we have talked about different types of networks that you can configure, as well as certificates and certificate enrollment extension, we can move on to how to configure 802.1x. So Chrome OS supports most 802.1x configurations. And once you go into the configuration page for the network that you want to set up, you can select in the security type 802.1x, and then under extensible authentication protocol, you can choose between a few different varieties. So for example, you could use PEP, which would use the username and the password of the user to authenticate onto the network. Or you could use the more common 802.1x configuration that we see a lot in the enterprise, EFTLS, which in addition to username and passwords also makes use of client certificates to authenticate the user or the device to the network. Also, just something to note, when you're configuring network variables, then you can use certain placeholders. So for example, as been done in this example, you can use this pattern to make sure that the login ID of the user trying to authenticate are automatically filled out as the login ID and user ID of the person who is logged into the Chrome OS device. And there's more examples of this, and you can find it on the link once we've shared the slides with you after this session. And then also the client enrollment URL that you can see on this page is pointing towards the client, the certificate enrollment extension. And what this does is that once the user tries to authenticate or tries to log into a network who are protected by EFTLS, the certificate extension will automatically launch, and then the user can enter their Active Directory details and apply for a certificate that way. And doing that will make sure that the certificate is obtained and imported onto the device. And after that, the user can successfully authenticate onto the network. So let's talk about Wi-Fi best practices. First of all, a device network should always be configured on any device, and this is due to the fact that the device will fall back on the device level network once it doesn't have any other network connections. So once a user logs out, if you don't have any device level network configured and only the user level one, the device will lose all network connection, and the only way to reconnect is by connecting to a network manually. And this could be a lower level security network. So a guest network would be more than suitable for this purpose and would use a simple authentication such as a pre-shared key. The device network should always provide access to at least a list of host names that are you can find on the link, which we are providing on this slide. And also if you're using SAML SSO, the device level network should have access to the SAML IDP so that you are able to log in. Also, the device level network should have access to the certificate enrollment service if using client certificates, so that if, for example, a user which are on the device level network wants to authenticate onto the corporate network, which uses EFTLS, then they would be redirected to that certificate enrollment service and able to obtain a client certificate so they can authenticate onto that network. Finally, you should also make sure that the device level network has access to DNS servers so that they can resolve DNS. If you're using EFTLS, then networking best practice is to configure that as a user network with a user certificate. It is possible to configure device level EFTLS with a device wide certificate, but that is not something that we recommend from a best practice point of view. And also, if you're using the certificate enrollment for Chrome OS extension, then end users should have the right to request new certificates. And this can be, for example, since certificates expired, then once those certificates expires, users should be able to request a new certificate without involving any administrators. So we talked quite a bit about the certificate enrollment for Microsoft CA extension, but we also have other extension available as well for enrolling client certificates. So, for example, the CloudPath certificate generator or Aerohive client management extension. We also have an extension for Cisco ICE and also for Workspace ONE, which is part of the Workspace ONE EMM solution. So if you are using the Workspace ONE EMM solution for managing your Chrome fleet, then they will force install that extension on the devices in order to enroll client certificates to them. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, the APIs are available from Google so that you can implement your own solution. So if you have your own PKI infrastructure that you would like to integrate together with a Chrome extension, then you are more than welcome to make use of the APIs that we've made available to you. So that wraps up the section on network best practices, and now we will leave room for some Q&A.